So this is clearly unacceptable. And if you want to put a dollar value on it, I think it's costing our country $3.5 to $5 billion a year. That's an enormous loss. Now, to be honest, I'm not telling you something earth-shattering in the sense that nobody has ever heard of this problem. In actual fact, when I started doing research on this, I discovered that Statistics Canada had published 64 reports. And I know they did 64 reports because I read every single one of them in generating the report, right? So we're having a real problem with immigration and integrating newcomers into the economy. So here comes the question, right? To what extent is language and literacy part of the challenge? Well, intuitively you would think it is, because one of the things that's happened is that structurally the flow of newcomers has shifted from, in terms of where they're originating from. If we went back to, a few decades ago, what you would find is the bulk of immigration was coming from Europe, and a much higher portion was coming from countries that English or French was a native tongue. Right? Increasingly, what's happened is more than, close to 60% is now from Asia. And when we look at the share that's actually from English and French-speaking native countries, the ratio has fallen dramatically. So it is natural that you would expect that it's going to be more difficult. Because ultimately, as I said, and this is, I want to stress, we're not talking about newcomers having poor literacy skills in general. What we're really saying is that maybe they don't have the desired level from an English and French point of view, but unfortunately that's what truly matters from a point of view of outcomes in the labor market. So if we ask newcomers, is this a problem? Well, as you might expect, the number one challenge that newcomers identify is finding an adequate job, but number two in the StatsCan survey is learning a new language. And that actually argue that number one and number two are related. It's extraordinarily difficult to get a good job if you're having a language problem. I remember reading a book once that told me that if I was going out to do a job interview, I better make sure I polish my shoes, because the percentage of male job candidates that achieve landing the job goes up if you have your shoes shined. Okay, if that makes a difference, just imagine how important language skills are in the interview, right? And there was a survey done, I believe, for TRIAC in the Toronto area that basically showed that 30% of individuals were reporting that language is part of is a major challenge, right? They actually argued that Canadian experience was the single biggest challenge. So within the academic community, as you might actually imagine, economists don't agree, right? It's actually, I think it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt that said, for the love of God, give me a one-handed economist. Right? Because it's sort of on one hand, on the other hand, there's a joke about it. If you ask two economists their opinion, you'll get three answers. Right? So the academic community does not agree on how much language and literacy is having an impact. There's been some research done that suggests that maybe up to 2/3 of the income gap might be caused by things like language and literacy or cultural issues. But then there's been some very high quality work by the Microeconomic Analysis Division at Statistics Canada that argued actually the ratio is only 1/3, and they basically said that it's issues around recognizing foreign experience, and it's some of the issues around us bringing in IT workers right at the peak of the tech boom, and then the tech boom collapsed, and then they became unemployed. There's a bunch of other issues out there. I got to be honest, I don't care. I don't care if it's 2/3 of the problem or 1/3 of the problem. If you know what 1/3 of the problem is, let's deal with it. Right? So we know we have a problem here. We've identified that there's a challenge. And ultimately, I think literacy is the great enabler. I think that's probably the single best definition of it. So whether it's newcomers or whether it's Canadian-born individuals that are having challenges, you have to understand just how much literacy enables. So let's run through the benefits, right? If you have stronger literacy skills, you're more likely to go on to post-secondary education. If you go on to post-secondary education, you're more actually likely to succeed at it. If you have stronger literacy skills, you're far more likely to do continual training, do ongoing training, adult education programs. If you look at the employment outcomes, we've already sort of touched on this, but your employment outcome goes from an employment rate of 57% if you have poor literacy to 81% with strong. I mean, these are enormous numbers. You get a huge pickup in employment. And what's interesting about the literacy statistics is if you have stronger literacy skills and you lose your job, your duration of unemployment is half as long as if you have than those that have weak skills. So you can actually cut your unemployment duration in half by improving language and literacy skills that then have a positive impact in reinforcing other skills development. It leads to better quality jobs, right? Higher literacy skills basically end up, enabling you to work in higher skilled professions. And ultimately, it pays off in higher income. And the difference between poor and strong is you basically double your income. I would stress to you that this is each year, right? Economists know a lot about the beauty or the merits of compounding interest, right? If you compound something over time, it goes up enormously. So if you have stronger literacy skills and you get you double your income one year, and then next year you're going to double that income, and so on, right? We're talking about a huge difference in the standard of living. And for people out there that are really concerned about things like, civic participation, are you worried about people volunteering for charities? Are you worried about election turnout rates? It turns out that civic participation goes up enormously the higher you have literacy, the stronger your literacy skills. As an economist, I worry about one of the biggest challenges we have in this country is we have abysmal productivity performance. Right? Productivity in Canada has collapsed. We desperately need more skilled workers because that's how we're going to actually increase the standard of living in Canada. Canada is falling short relative to most other industrialized countries. Our productivity performance has stalled. It used to be we used to produce about 2%, 2.5% more per worker. Right now we're running at about 0.5%. And people don't like productivity. They don't like productivity because they think it means working harder, working longer. It's got a really bad connotation. Understand that what productivity truly means is when you think about the economy, you can either increase the amount of income in the economy by adding workers or by taking your existing workforce and having them produce more. Well, from a demographic point of view, the population is slowing, right? Population growth is going to come down to an extraordinarily low level. So for Canada to grow, we have to do it by actually being more productive. And ultimately what happens is the more productive we are, the income pie gets larger, and then it gets split between workers and businesses. And as a consequence of that, this is how you get a rising standard of living. In fact, since the end of the Second World War, 80% of all of the rise in standard of living in Canada has come from productivity growth. And productivity growth in Canada has stalled. So we desperately need a more skilled workforce to address this issue. We also have a situation where the economy has become much less stable. I remember when my dad graduated from college, he went to work for Westinghouse, and he stayed at Westinghouse his entire life, and then he retired from Westinghouse. Right? Today, workers will go through several employers and several occupations, and they are going to need to be able to keep changing with the times. And you can see this in terms of the structure of the economy. We're seeing a rising services sector, more skilled services sector, and manufacturing as a share of the economy is declining. And within manufacturing, there's a huge shift towards higher skilled manufacturing. We need a more skilled labor force. And as the population ages, the unemployment rate, although it's elevated at the moment, it's going to come down. And as it comes down, we're going to run into labor shortages again. Make no mistake, they are going to happen. So we need to ensure that we are taking the population we have and using them as effectively and as efficiently as we possibly can. So, I did some counterfactual analysis. I said, what would happen, if we just took those international numbers and we held everything constant and we said, okay, so, based on those literacy scores and those income levels and those employment levels, what would happen if you actually boosted literacy? This was a very arithmetic exercise, so it's a little artificial, but it does give you an idea of the magnitude of the impacts that we're talking about here. If you actually boosted everyone that have poor and weak literacy skills to average or to adequate, you'd create 800,000 jobs or 3.5 years worth of employment. If you boosted literacy by 1%, you would boost labor productivity by 2.5%. And if you actually want the bottom line dollar value, if you actually could get everybody to adequate, you could lift the economy by $80 to $100 billion. And that's probably the maximum, because one of the things that would happen is if everybody had adequate literacy, people that had stronger skills actually wouldn't get a premium. So maybe the number would be a little lower than this, but we're talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars. And while this calls for a role for government to play in terms of supporting literacy and helping investment in literacy and encouraging newcomers to take advantage of literacy programs, I fundamentally believe there is an important role for the private sector to play. You know what my biggest problem is? Getting out to speak before audiences that are commercial businesses speaking about this subject. Right? Show of hands, how many of you think literacy is important? You're the wrong audience, right? But when I go out and I speak to a chamber of commerce and I'm doing this presentation, this is actually my first slide, and I get up and I say, I'm going to speak to you today about a subject that is I think is extraordinarily important. So I want you to imagine for a second that I'm a business consultant and I'm coming to you with a product, and here's the product I want to sell you, right? If you buy my product, I promise you increased output and profitability. I will lower your error rates. I will increase your ability to do on-the-job training. I will increase your team performance. I will improve your labor relations. I will improve the quality of work. I will reduce the time per task. I will improve your health and safety records. And I promise you better employee and customer retention. Are you interested in my product? Right? But this is actually what higher literacy skills does. This was from a survey done by the Conference Board that asked employers to identify what exactly higher skilled workers does for them. And this is why it's critical. And the really discouraging thing is that when we look at average literacy skills over the last 40 years, 50 years, they actually haven't improved. And you know what's really discouraging about that? It's discouraging because we have been talking about it. There are programs out there, but we just aren't seeing the improvement. Now, there is a pushback. The pushback to this slide is, if you adjusted for the fact that more newcomers are coming from non-English and French areas, you would actually see an improvement. If you looked at this purely from the point of view of Canadian-born individuals, you would see an improvement, right? But I will be honest, from an economist point of view, right, what matters is the total. And so we haven't seen any improvement. So I've already gone way too long. I like the red sign that says "Stop now." That has been getting waved for a couple minutes now. It is a little distracting, actually. But the bottom line is that higher literacy does bring enormous gains to individuals, to businesses, to the economy, and to society. And my last point is, I think the big challenge here is that when I go out and I speak and I cannot get people motivated on this subject, I just can't. Canadians don't think we have a problem. It's a hard sell. What I've come to the conclusion is, the best way to tackle this seems to be to relate literacy to things that people do care about. And the most amazing thing about this subject is I actually find that I almost defy you to come up with a subject that I can't link it to.